It's preparing to live stream. I'm hoping it will tell me that we are live like it does on Facebook. This webinar is being live streamed and being redirected. Oh my goodness, it's so exciting. There we go. I think I'm about to see us all. And there we are. I can see us. So that is marvelous. It will tell me that we are live like it does on Facebook. So I better close that off. So at least we know it's working. That's brilliant. Well, welcome everybody. To those of you who are able to join us live, you are so welcome. It's great to have you here. For those of you who are catching us on the replay, you are very welcome as well. And please don't be put off by the fact that you're watching a replay. If you have a question or a comment for me or any of our speakers, please do pop it in the comments below, and we will get back to you without a shadow of a doubt. Now, before I get going, I do have to do the YouTube thing and say, make sure you hit that subscribe button and then hit that little bell. And I say that not just because my channel is marvelous, but also because we are going to have another panel discussion like this next week. So if you find that this has been really useful and you're learning a lot, make sure you get the notification for next week's, where we'll have some more authors coming in to talk to us from Launchpad, the countdown to writing your book. But I want to start off just by saying hi to everybody. I'm kind of going to go around my screen and just ask everybody to say hello and tell us a little bit about what you write and or how you help authors. So Stacy, you're up at the top of my screen. I wonder if we can start with you.
Sure. I'm Stacy Juba, and I write romantic comedy, mystery, romantic suspense, young adult books, and I've written a couple of children's books. And I'm also a freelance developmental editor and line editor, and teach online courses through Shortcuts for Writers.
It's a fantastic service that you offer. I've been through your Shortcuts for Writers as well, especially the blueprint, book editing blueprint, and it's super. So if you haven't checked it out already, if you don't know Stacy, please do go and look at it. So thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And Grace, welcome to you. Lovely Grace, who is the mastermind behind the very reason we are here today. I wonder if you could say hello, tell us a little bit about what you write and how you help authors.
Hello to everybody. I'm so excited about this launch. And Emma, thanks for doing this and getting us up on YouTube. I live in the United States. I write both fiction and nonfiction. My first few books are in the area of education. Then I wrote a novel, which changed my life because of so much I didn't know. And then through that, I've got 2 different radio shows. One of them is called Launchpad, and that's such a fun experience to help authors write and launch their books that we decided to create Launchpad, the series. So I'm so excited to be here to help launch this series.
Oh, no, it's brilliant. It's wonderful to have you here. I always love to see your smiley face. So thank you. But it's interesting what you were saying there, though, about how writing a novel totally changed your life. And I think you and I are sort of both in agreement that writing a novel, it's about more than just the words on the page. It's really who you become in the process of writing it, I think.
Absolutely.
Yay. Samantha, lovely to have you here. You're next on my screen. I should just let you know that Samantha is my book coach. She is the genius behind my latest book, and I wouldn't be without her. And I'm writing thriller. This is the area that Samantha sort of specializes in, and so I could not resist reaching out to Sam and saying, please come and help us learn how to add conflict, suspense, and tension to our stories. So Sam, tell us about you, because you write as well as coach. Tell us about you and what you do.
I do. Thank you so much for having me, Emma. You're one of my favorite people. So I am a thriller author, as Emma said. Nothing published yet, but I do have an agent, so I'm working on my debut. And I coach mystery, thriller, and suspense authors from novel planning all the way through agent pitching. So the whole shebang. It's super fun. I adore all this work, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I know it is. It's good fun. Thrillers are good fun, definitely. Lewis, thank you very much to you for being here. I've known you for a few years now, and I always love it when we get a chance to do something together. So thanks for being part of the project. And yeah, tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. This is really exciting. I am am also a developmental editor and book coach. I help up-and-coming authors who are sort of struggling with how overwhelming their writing process is and sort of streamlining that and helping them find a little bit more clarity. And I primarily work over at the Novel Smithy. So that's where you can find most of my work.
And do go over and check the Novel Smithy, because it's a fantastic site. There's so many great resources over there. I really do recommend it. I frequently go there myself. So do check it out if you're watching. And Janyre, lovely to kind of meet you properly. I think we've only met at doing this project. We didn't know each other before. Grace very kindly kind of introduced us, and it's great to have you here. So I too would love to kind of hear a little bit more about what you write and any of the services that you have.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. This is so much fun to do this kind of thing. So I wear two very different hats in my life. I say that during the day, I'm a developmental editor. I actually work for a traditional publishing house. It's a medium-sized house here in the States. And then at night, I swap out hats and I become a writer, in addition to taking care of my family and that type of a thing. So I write historical novels with a healthy dose of lyrical suspense. So I play in a lot of different areas. As an editor, I actually work fiction and nonfiction. And then I strictly pretty much in my writer life write novels, except when I'm doing fun things like this and helping other authors figure out what to do and how to move forward.
It is you're so right, I think, in describing this as like two hats, the writer hat and then the editor hat. Yeah. So and there's a few of you that do this, so I would love to know, do you have a preference for which hat you wear, and kind of how easy or difficult do you find it to swap between the two? Stacy, I'll start with you. I know you do more editing than you do sort of fiction writing at the moment, but still you do wear both hats, so how do you find that?
Yeah, I just find, as a writer, when I'm writing, I tend to, the editor in my brain is talking to me a lot. So I'm kind of meticulous about, like, before I got into editing, I just would, just write the first draft and, come back to it later to do the editing. But now I find myself sort of editing more as I'm going along, just because the editor part of my brain is saying, no, you gotta, you gotta go back and set that up, or there's not enough description in this scene. So, I think it's helpful. My process has evolved from when I first started writing, but I think it is helpful. I just have to remind myself as a writer that it doesn't have to be perfect right away. There's plenty of time to fix it later. And as an editor, I think being a writer, being able to easily put on that writer hat, I can kind of put myself into, how my clients are feeling. I know it might be overwhelming to get a long editorial letter back. So I think coming out from a writer, I can relate to them and say, hey, I know this might seem overwhelming, but really I've been through this myself. And when you sit down and do it, just do it step by step, focus on one thing at a time. It's not as overwhelming as it might seem, when you first get the letter.
Definitely, I know that feeling very, very well. And I've sort of said to Sam in the past, I'll open the letter, have a look at it, shut it down, have a cry, then kind of get my strength together again, and then go and look at it properly without too much emotion attached to it. Lewis, I know that you are working on your novel as well, and you're writing epic fantasy, I think, isn't it? It is the big fantasy. So how do you negotiate that, keeping your creative hat on and sort of trying to make sure you've got that creative freedom going on, but at the same time you do edit? So are you able to quieten your editor as you are being the creator?
Yeah, speaking of like closing the laptop and having a good cry, I'm very bad at turning off my inner editor. I very much prefer the editor hat. I really identify with a lot of my clients when they're like coming back to me, kind of like you were saying, Stacy. They come back with like all their feelings about the feedback I've given. I'm like, oh yeah, I feel that about my own work. Yeah, it's funny. I'm the type who just has to power through the first draft I don't find it enjoyable at all. But then as soon as I get to the editing, it's like it all opens up. It's so much easier to work with something you've created versus a blank page, in my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm like you. I like to get that first draft done, but I do enjoy it. I really enjoy that first drafting process. So Janyre, how about you? Because you, as an editor, as you know, in a traditional house and very much your day job, now that you're writing as well, do you find that you have a little bit more empathy for the people that you're editing for now, or do you kind of have to no, this is my editor hat and I've got an obligation to be tough on these books to make sure they're the best they can be, or how does it work for you?
So I've actually always been a pretty laid back editor. So I came to the publishing world through the marketing department. So even though my degree is in English, I almost had a double degree in English and marketing. And so I always come from it. My developmental work is always coming from the side of what does the reader experience? And so I always come into my editing from that perspective. And so I've always been empathetic for my writers because I'm coming to them as a reader and saying, I love this part of it. It would be even better if we did it this way. You know, can we work together in this way? And so I'm often, my authors will cry. But I tell them, I've always told them, go have a good cry and then come back to me. You're allowed to be mad at me for a little while, but this is a discussion. And so I've always approached editing as a discussion rather than a team. We're in this together, rather than kind of an antagonistic approach to editing. That said, my weakness in my own writing is the editing, which blows everybody away and makes them laugh. And it's because I get too much in my head. Mm-hmm. So I can write and feel free to write and play and put things together. But then when I go back to do my self edits, that's when I get too much in my head. Mm-hmm. And so I always tell people as I'm approaching editing too, even editors need editors. We all cannot see the forest for the trees when we're approaching our own work. And so it's an encouraging thing, I think, for authors to hear that there's a bunch of us editors in here and we struggle. And so it's okay to struggle as long as you don't stop. It's okay to take breaks, but don't stop. If you hear nothing else, hear that. I think successful authors are those that stand up and keep going and keep learning and keep digesting. And if you're here learning something, kudos to you. You're doing a great job.
Exactly. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, such wise words there. Don't stop. And that editors need editors. And that's why it just keeps going around. It's wonderful. I will say hello to Kat, who has joined us. Hi, Kat. Take yourself off mute and say hello. I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about what you write and how you help authors.
Ooh, what do I write? So I write historical fiction and contemporary fiction. That's about very broad categories that I then narrow down later. And short stories, I guess. I'm a certified book coach, but I run online workshops more or less. So I don't do as much one-on-one. I have done it, but I do workshops so that we can, have those moments for writers where they can find what they need in that moment so that they can keep going, basically. So I'm in the middle of all that right now.
Well, welcome. It's so good to have you here and have you being part of Launchpad, the countdown to writing your book. And talking of Launchpad, the countdown to writing your book, I want to come back to Grace because you're the mastermind kind of behind all of this. And I'd love to know what was the sort of, I know you've got the radio show and you can maybe tell us a sort of a little something about that too, if people are interested to go and find out more. But what made you want to turn this into a book series as well? And I think what makes this series so special is the countdowns that you wanted us to have at the end of each chapter. So I wonder if you'd kind of just speak into that a little bit.
Thanks, Emma. I think that I want to piggyback first on some of the comments about editing. Through this whole process, there's so much editing going on. We've got each of our collaborators who are getting edited, who are then editing their edits. And it's been such an interesting process. I love editing. So it's something that I really love, the things that each of our contributors have said so far, but it's also really made me draw the distinction. I used to talk about my editing hat and then my creative writing hat, as if writing nonfiction is not creative. And that's was something I've really played with over the course of getting these 3 books out, is that all writing is creative writing, whether it is fiction or not. So it's been, I have a very different editor hat than a writing hat. And I find that when I'm in the middle of edits, I am less creative, whether it is fiction or nonfiction. So I didn't know if anybody else had that issue of, you're not doing that new writing as much when you're doing that editing process. But in terms of creating the series, part of it really did spring up out of the fact that even though I had 3 books under my belt, I'd been traditionally published, when I did my novel, it was such an aha moment. The things I didn't know, everything from the vocabulary that we all use to work in progress, WIP, TBR, to be read, point of view, all of the things that I knew nothing about. If there's a hallmark that I hope I have in all of the multiple businesses I've found, it's about creative collaboration, and that we are all bringing each other up in this world if we bother to take the time to bring each other up. So part of the idea for this was, I already had the one radio show, The Storytellers. And then I had this idea based on our colleague, Mary Helen Sheriff, who had started a marketing business. And I thought, if there was a way to marry the radio show concept to the marketing concept, we could continue to lift authors up. And zap, I thought, this is going to be a great radio show. And why don't we just create a book series at the same time? The thing that I think will surprise everybody, and Emma, this surprised me in preparation for some future work you and I are doing. I wrote to Emma on June 5th, 2022. And here it is 7 months later, and we have a book. So from June 5th, she said yes to writing the series with me on June 12th. We had a signed contract with Red Penguin Books on June 27th, and we're coming out with a book on February 28th. Just unheard of, and something really to be celebrated. And Emma, thank you for being such a champion on this. And each of our contributors, I learned so much. And that's the thing that Janyre was saying. As long as we're all in this work, continuing every day to learn, it's a joy. And we get better at the job.
And it is a joy. I think that's, I don't know if anybody else agrees, but I do think that's part of the fun. It's part of, I enjoy that element of the challenge of it, that every book you write, the next book you write is always the best book that you write. And so you're always getting better and mastering your skills, and whether it be from how to structure a scene, how to plot, how to pants, all of these things, we're always learning a new aspect to the skill and to storytelling. But I do want us to pull us back to the content of the book, because that's what people are wanting. And I thought, what a great place to start is with outlining. For some people, they love it, would never write a book without it. Other people are like, no, it's not for me. I don't do outlining. But Lewis, your chapter is fantastic, because you really do address the 3 different writer types and how they come to writing and how they approach their process and their work. So I'd love it if you'd kind of just tell us about those 3 writer types that you've identified in your chapter, and how roughly, a top line about how they approach novel writing.
Yeah, certainly. So as with all sort of labels like this, there's shades of gray and everything in between. But I find with the writers I've worked with, and in my own experience and talking with other sort of people in this space, that there are plotters, which is sort of the traditional group that likes to outline their novels before they start writing. They like to have a really clear vision of exactly what's going to happen. And obviously it's a range. I work with one author who's very dear to me, who, bless her heart, her outline is almost as long as her final novel is going to be. It's truly a work of genius. And I know others whose outlines are, they're substantial, but they definitely have holes in them that they're going to fill as they write. So that would be a plotter. Pantsers tend to exist on the other end of the spectrum. They are writers who, quote unquote, fly by the seat of their pants. They like to just sort of dive in. They're discovery writers and figure out their story through the writing process. A lot of the pantsers that I work with are very adamant that outlining sort of steals their creativity. It kind of stifles their story, that they really like to figure it out while they're writing. And ironically, right around when you got in touch with me about this book that is really exciting, I had recently been introduced to the idea of puzzlers as sort of this, like, not really a middle ground, sort of like a third leg of this triangle. And it had been a really exciting moment in my writing because I had always very much identified as a plotter. I'm the weird person with like sticky notes all over their wall as I'm like putting things together. I'm that crazy person. But I was introduced to the idea of a puzzler, which is someone who likes to write a couple key parts of their story that they have like a very clear idea of, and then kind of work backwards on stitching those pieces together into something cohesive. And that could be that they're going to write, are going to write their finale, and they're going to write like 2 scenes in the middle of their draft, and they know how it starts, but then they have to stitch the rest together. Or it could be that they have a really clear idea of like a couple characters, but they don't know what story they're going to exist in, or they have a clear idea of a couple just pieces that then they're going to have to stitch together. And the timing of all that was really good because you reached out to me about this, and I was exploring a lot of that in my own writing process and realizing maybe I exist more towards the puzzler end of the spectrum. But as you mentioned, where you exist in that kind of triangle of writing styles does influence a lot how you are going to approach your writing process. Mm-hmm. Again, for instance, a pantser, they're going to get an idea and they're just going to kind of start writing it and see where it goes. Whereas a plotter wants the security of kind of knowing what's ahead of them. But as an editor, setting my writing self aside and its sort of personal feelings, as an editor, I've found that writers who have some kind of plan of their story up front tend to be a lot more successful, not to ruffle any feathers, because I know that's frustrating for a lot of people. But what I think is so great about understanding where you exist on that spectrum is that how you plan your story can be really unique to you. It doesn't have to be, the author I work with who has just this like binders and binders of outlines. It can be a 1-page sort of hitting the highlights just to give you enough signposts to work towards, mm-hmm. that you're less likely to get into your first draft and hit a wall and kind of lose steam because you just don't know how to progress. Yeah. I feel like I answered that question and like 5 others, but hopefully that was helpful.
No, that was super. Because the puzzlers I love, I've always referred to them as sort of patchwork writers, where they, and I just love that. I like the puzzle analogy as well. And certainly I'm working with a student who is exactly like that. And so she'll send me her work as well. And having to because I'm not a puzzler. So trying to piece it all together and work out how it all fits in. Sam, I'm sure you must work with students of all different approaches to outlining and not outlining. Have you, which one do you find that you are in? Is there a camp that you're in? Are you a plotter, a pantser, or a puzzler? And have you worked with any puzzlers over the course of your coaching?
Yes, to all of that. And Lewis, thank you for putting a name to puzzlers. That's the first time I've heard of that. And I love it because I feel like that's where I lean that way as well. When I first start writing, I'm an exploratory writer. So I'll usually have a clear scene and then write that and then figure out whether or not it fits in. Sometimes it doesn't, but it at least gives me the germ of the idea. In terms of working with people, it definitely is across the board. I tend to sort of gently herd my clients toward plotting because at a certain point with thrillers and mysteries, you have to know what's going on. There's so much misdirection and layers of, manipulating the reader. all these things, they need to be figured out. But if I have somebody come to me for novel planning, we always start off with just, here's this workbook that I have. Kat, I think you mentioned you're a certified book coach as well. So Jenny Nash, Author Accelerator, she has this amazing series of questions, and that's what I kind of guide people through. But it's always, there's no judgment, right? It's like, whatever your ideas are, this is what they are. And then we work from there. And I do gently herd them toward plotting by the end. But yeah, it's amazing to see people's brains. Like, I learned so much every time I work with a new client, and I generally end up learning something new that I can apply to my own work. It's really fun. This is such fun work. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, it is fun work. It is. Janyre, what about you in terms of maybe your own writing as well? Do you feel that you fit into one of those camps? And do you work with your clients kind of from the beginning, or they come to you with a near finished manuscript, so you don't quite get to see that process from them?
So a little bit of both, because I do some very limited freelance work too. So for me, I always tell the people that I work with, it doesn't matter how you start a book, you need an outline by the time you're done with the book. And so I'm a puzzler too. Imagine this. I was like, oh, I love that name too. And I always talked about it as I create points on the outline and then create connective tissue between them. And that's how I've always described my process. So I don't have a super clear outline when I start, but I always start the developmental edit. So that very first edit, the first thing I always recommend doing is an outline of the book. And so if you use Scrivener, it's super easy because you have the lovely description notes that go in your scene or your chapter or whatever, and you can literally compile that out into a Word document or print it out. So you can read yourself through your story, and each chapter or scene has 2 sentences of a description. You can see plot holes that way. It's amazing what comes out when you go, oh, look at this. I have this happening up here at A, but then all of a sudden, yeah, that doesn't quite work, does it? And so even if you are a pantser, one of the things I always recommend, the first thing to do when you're done and you write the end, write out an outline. Even those who have plotted at the beginning, hopefully something has changed and caught you by surprise as you're writing the book. Otherwise, your readers won't necessarily be surprised if everything goes as planned. So even if you're a plotter, I recommend going through after you're done and creating an outline at the end. It just works. I hate outlines. I am one of those people, which surprises people because I am an editor by trade. I love them for editing. I hate them for writing.
Yeah.
So if that's you, that's totally fine. Just realize that outlines are a tool that are very necessary for edits, like it or not.
Yeah, I agree. And someone who is resistant to outlines, they are so useful in revision. So useful. Kat, what about you? Do you which camp do you fit in, and do you like an outline?
Oh gosh, I hate outlines. But I have, I'm the personality that resists the work once I feel like the work has finished. So an outline, it feels like that. But the last few years, I have seen the benefit of them. I've talked to Lewis and I've talked to other people. And yeah, at least making the outline at the end definitely shows your plot holes. It's pretty great to see them yourself instead of sending it off to an editor and an editor telling you have plot holes. So beneficial.
It certainly is. It certainly is. But I know that you love delving into character, and character is a big kind of interest area for you, as it is for me. It's one of my kind of passion projects with writing and the craft side of it. And you very kindly contributed a chapter about character and how we can find a character and really try to flesh them out and make them as believable and as 3-dimensional as we possibly can. And you've got, and I know you did a lot of work on this in 2022, and you've shared much of what you found with us in the chapter. And one of the things I really enjoyed about your chapter was that is your approach to finding personality types for your characters, and then thinking about how they might work with the genre that you're writing. And you mentioned 5 main categories in your chapter, and I wonder if you can just kind of tell us a little bit about them. I hope I'm not putting you on the spot too much.
No, it's okay. I know a lot of people these days like to use the Enneagram, and so I did delve into that a little bit recently. I didn't talk about it as much in the chapter because what I know are the other five personality models, but it's really about finding out who the character is so that they react properly when the plot happens to them. So whenever I'm talking with my students, I guess I'll call them, when we're working on characters, like, okay, what are they like, and then why would they act like that? Like the other day, we were talking, a meet cute isn't going to happen with this girl because she doesn't trust men. Like that is part of her background. So a meet cute, when she's just like, oh my gosh, I found this really handsome man and he bumped into me, she's going to be like, how dare you bump into me, you man, so understanding like how the people are. And so you go with like openness. So a high open person is very creative. They're very open to new things and changes, and that's really cool with them. Another person is like low openness. So people who need a plan, and if you don't stick to the plan, they're going to be like very upset about it, right? I mean, that's really kind of, we're just going over these very quickly, but conscientious people are very like aware of like what's happening with different with the people around them, with the environment around them, right? The low conscientious people are probably our big procrastinators. They don't really want to dig into big tasks. High conscientious people are usually, maybe they'll gravitate towards admin because they are super good at all the little details. It's really important to understand this with our characters so that they don't have really weird responses, because the readers will see these responses and they will be very turned off by it, but they won't know how to tell you why, right? Mm-hmm. They'll know that these characters aren't behaving in the right way, but they won't be able to help you with it. So then you have like extroversion or introversion, like how they react to being in crowds of people, with a lot of people. That's going to affect how they interact with the characters that are around them in the book, right? Mm-hmm. Like your introverts, like if 007 loved to be around people all the time, he probably wouldn't have chosen to be a lone spy in the world, like, and of course you're choosing this person as your as the author, but you have to make sure that they're reacting properly. The agreeableness, some of these are, it's kind of strange to like make a character that's low in agreeableness, but you think of like a man called Obe, I don't know if I'm saying that properly, like that's part of his character arc. Like he's not agreeable. My maternal grandfather was not agreeable, as much as I love him. And that's just part of their personality. It makes them their, gives them their quirk. So high agreeable, they'll be very sympathetic towards others. They'll assist people. Always, they're the ones looking out to like hold the door for people. And low agreeable is like, go do that yourself. Like, why are you bothering me? Like, I definitely think I went and saw the movie A Man Called Otto, and yeah, definitely he did a great job with that one. And then neuroticism, and that's a strange word to us too, right? But we're talking about like how they deal with stress, and so I talk about that too. Like, I know we use neurotic kind of funny in our society, but basically like, how emotionally stable are you? And when you're in a stressful situation, like, do you, freak out? Or do you find the ways to like deal with that situation? And that's going to affect your character as well, and how they react to your plot, because if you need them to be calm, then they need to be like low on the neuroticism scale all the time, because we don't tend to have these different peaks. Unless you're you're writing a character is specifically like that, right? So I really like to dig into these personality traits and like how you see your character as a writer, to make sure, especially as you go through and probably with your outline, that they are reacting in the right way and that their growth is really stable with how they are from the beginning. Because as we all need to grow, our personalities might become a little like more settled, but they don't completely change out of the blue, right? So I think it's just a very important piece of the puzzle of writing.
Yay. Oh, thank you for that. Yeah, that's a really good rundown of those different traits that we can explore and see where our characters fit into. And so when you're thinking about a new character, do you sort of have an idea in your head about what they might be like, and then go and explore each of these traits and see which one fits best? Because I remember too in the chapter you mentioned about genre and thinking about, okay, well, what kind of story am I writing here, and what kind of personality might fit well with that type of story? So are you quite conscientious now about how you develop your characters?
Yeah, right now I am, especially because it will change how the story goes. So the plot that I have thought of as most likely a pantser semi-puzzler at this point, it's like what I want to have happen will change depending on how the character is. So if we have a bubbly Elle from Legally Blonde, she's going to react differently than if I have Indiana Jones. Like everything will be different. A car crash, Elle will probably be very high in neuroticism and just like, Indiana Jones will probably duct tape that baby back together and be on his way. So yeah, it's definitely, and I explore it too. Like how are they going to react, and putting them in different situations and figuring out what the best personality is for how I want them to go through the story.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Really.
And I want to pop in there just for a minute about the book as a whole, but springing from what Kat was just talking about. Almost, I think every chapter has some sort of series of exercises that you can go through to match the topic with your own writing. And at the end of every chapter, there's these top 10 countdowns to here's like 10 essential tips to make sure that you do that. And I was really struck in Kat's chapter about almost giving your characters personality tests, whether you use Myers-Briggs or other, and that's something I had not thought about. In my own novel, someone had said to me, sit down and interview your character. And that was a wonderful exercise for me. But that struck me in every single one of these chapters, that you walk away not only with the wisdom of the contributors, but some real wonderful tools, like how can I measure up and rub my own writing against that? And Kat's description of it just prompted that. That's such an important thing for our listeners to know about.
So right, Grace. I'm really glad you said that. And I think that is one of the things that makes our series of books so unique, is that it's not just that each of our contributors are saying, here are my thoughts on this particular topic. Now go away and think about it. But actually, as we all know, if you don't implement what you learn, it's almost for naught. So at the end of each chapter, yeah, as you say, we've got these top 10 countdowns of actionable points that people can go away with and know that if they take the time and give it some thought and put it into action, their craft is going to improve, and by default, their story is going to improve as well. So I'm really, really glad you mentioned that. Thank you. Yay. So thanks, Kat. I love talking about character, as you know, and it does play into how our characters react, and therefore how the story is going to evolve. With every story we write, no matter what genre we're writing in, it does need to have a degree of, it needs to have conflict right up there, straight on, and a degree of suspense and a degree of tension with it as well, because I think, Sam, that this is what kind of, no matter what genre you're writing, we want that little bit of an edge, because that's what keeps us as a reader kind of intrigued. Oh, what's going to happen next? What are they going to do? I need to turn that page and find out. So Sam, I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about how we can increase suspense or tension or conflict within our scenes, not just for crime thriller or mystery stories, but in every story. So, if we wanted to ramp up a bit of suspense in a romance story, for example, how might we do that? Or a coming of age story, how might we think about ramping that up a bit?
Yeah, great question. So I'll take the romance one because that's a little easier to explain. So in romance, it's interesting because we always know there's going to be a happy ending, right? That's a part of writing a romance book, because there's a happy ever after. And so you might think that the tension would not be there because we know what's going to happen. And part of what makes tension and suspense happen in other types of books like thrillers or mysteries is that you don't know for sure that things are going to end well. And so with romance, the tension then becomes about how they get there. And, each scene is going to progressively build on that. And the biggest thing that I can tell people about building a scene with tension is to make sure that we understand what these people want. So to Kat's point about who these people are, what is their goal? And then what stands in their way? And if the reader is super clear on what those things are, then you can start messing with them and add even more things and make it worse. So one of my favorite craft books is this book called 2K to 10K by Rachel Aaron. Super small, really quick read. She's amazing. Read it. But her, I'll sort of paraphrase, but her advice is put your character in a tree, light that tree on fire. And then I think it's set a bonfire underneath the tree. And so our whole goal as writers is to just keep making things worse for these characters. And that applies across genre. Nobody wants to read a book where everything is wonderful and nothing bad happens, right? It just gets to be a little bit boring. So even if everything does end up happy, as it does in a romance, understanding what gets in their way and why that matters to them is hyper key for making sure that the reader feels that tension as well.
Absolutely. Yes. And so if we're thinking about if we've got a scene that we think, it's a bit flat, that nothing too much is happening, what in your own writing, for example, or if you're working with a client, what are the ways that you might kind of come up with some ideas for ramping that tension up? How can we light that tree on fire or put them up that tree? Do you brainstorm ideas, or do you look at their personality type, or maybe what's come before in the story? What are some of the ideas the way that you work?
Yeah, I love brainstorming with people. It's one of my most favorite things to do. So often we'll start with, what is the story question? So in romance, it's whether or not they get together. We know they're going to get together. So what stands in their way? Is there an ex that comes in? Is there an inn that needs to be bought, and the other person is the real estate developer, and the other person is trying to save the town, and they're butting heads over that? Is it, and I just start throwing ideas out, or they do, and then we talk about whether or not it works. We think about their personality types. I think one of the things that struck me most when I first started writing was how much psychology goes into writing and understanding character. And I feel like I'm becoming a bit of a mini expert, at least with my own characters, on how they react and why. And to get back to this, the clarity of what they're thinking, that interiority, that's what creates the suspense. And so it could be something as simple as a miscommunication. Somebody thinks something that somebody else has said is meaningful, and then they take a bunch of action based on that, and all of a sudden you've got them going like this, and there's your obstacle. So it doesn't always have to be like a hurricane or an alligator or whatever, right? It can be something as simple as, you didn't show up for coffee, so that means you hate me. And a certain personality type is going to, somebody neurotic is definitely going to think that. Indiana Jones might be like, well, okay, I'll see you tomorrow. And so it's fun to play with all those things and see what we can come up with. But yes, brainstorming, super fun.
And I wonder what your thoughts too are on, if we're thinking about one scene, do we add that little bit of conflict in there? Do we want to resolve it within that same scene, or are we looking to kind of maybe tease that out a little bit? Or does it depend?
I think it absolutely depends on what your goal is, right? So if you're looking at an overall book, if you have an as-is outline, at a certain point, if you're a pantser or a plotter, you're going to end up with a draft, and you're going to have an outline that reflects that draft. And so I like to tell people to look through the entire thing and get out a highlighter, or if you're on Word, actually highlight with the colors, and red is high tension, blue is low tension, and just see kind of what the color scheme looks like at the end. And I mean, my books always end up with big chunks of red and big chunks of blue. And so if you're looking at a scene where you have a bunch of low tension, add in something like somebody misses coffee. And what does that mean? you know, have them assume some things and get that interiority on the page to increase that tension. And no, I don't think the tension should be resolved at every scene, because then why would somebody turn the page? You know, we want to keep them going, but we also don't want a book where you have nothing resolved, because that's also frustrating for the reader. So we kind of want to like dribble out some snacks before we give them dinner, appetizers, dinner, you know, whatever the metaphor ends up being. But yeah.
I like that. I love that a lot. And I love your suggestion of using the highlighter, so that you as the writer get to see that kind of big picture, that visual of the big picture of how the shape of the story and how the pattern is moving through the novel. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, it's Jenny Nash again. I'm a huge fan of hers, and this is one of the things you suggest, but I did it with my own book and was frankly shocked. I thought I was a special snowflake who could just to come out of the gate and write this beautiful novel and it would be perfect. And it, spoiler alert, was not. There were so many problems. And that's one of the things that popped up, was just I had like 50% red and then a huge chunk of blue. And it was like, okay, here we go. You know, we're going to start revising.
If only we could all be snowflakes. Hey, that would be marvelous. So thank you for that, Sam. I think your chapter in conjunction with Joe Bunting's work really, really well together. Joe, who hopefully we'll meet next week, is talking about scene structure, and then you get to kind of give us that extra depth about how to add that conflict and really raise the stakes in it. So they work really, really well together. But then, you know, if we're sort of getting towards the end of our novel, or at least maybe our first draft, second, third draft, before we think about maybe publishing or sending it to an editor, we ourselves want to go through the book and do our self revisions. And one of the things that we want to make sure we've got right, Stacey, is our punctuation and our basic grammar, that we've got that correct. And I can't remember if I said this earlier today, but I was so pleased to have Stacey's chapter, because I am not spelling is not in my wheelhouse, grammar is not in my wheelhouse. These are things that slip me up all the time. And since I've had the draft of your chapter, Stacey, I have been referring to it many times, and I'll just check that. Am I doing this correctly? So it's been really useful already, even before the book is published. It's useful. And I know I'm not alone in that, and that's why it was really important to me that we did have a chapter on grammar and punctuation, if for my own selfish reasons, if nobody else's. But I was pleased when you wrote it and you kind of outlined the 10 most common errors, mistakes that you see people make, because it reassured me I'm not alone in this, that there are many of us for whom that is not in our wheelhouse. There'll be those of you watching who this is just second nature to you. How can you miss these spelling mistakes? How can you miss that the full stop's in the wrong place? But for some of us, it's really, really tough. So I wonder if you wouldn't mind just kind of giving us a little top line about some of the mistakes that you do see, and is it as common as I'm hoping that it is?
Yeah, very common. So I'm a developmental editor. I'm not a copy editor, but I kind of pick the most common mistakes that I see in manuscripts. Now, there's some people that that just have a lot of trouble with grammar and punctuation, and I can tell them some tips, but they're still going to need to hire a copy editor. They're still going to need to hire a proofreader. But I kind of like everybody makes the same kind of mistakes. It's just a different extent. Some people, you'll point these things out and they'll be able to, oh, okay, and they get the hang of it and they use some grammar tool and spell check, and it just starts kind of resonating with them and they make the mistakes less often. And then some people, it's just hard for them, and they'll continue making the mistakes, and you'll have to, they just really need to work with a copy editor or proofreader.
Mm-hmm.
So one big mistake is just with consistency of different punctuation marks. Like, and so I'm, as a developmental editor, I'm just big on consistency overall. Like your character going to, its personality suddenly change during the book? Are you with descriptions, is your character's eye color change during the book? So I'm also looking at consistency for punctuation. Just the big things and then the small things. So like the Oxford comma, the serial comma, which is like the final comma in a list of 3 or more items. I'll see a lot of times where sometimes the author will use it and sometimes they won't. And, there's different style guides. If you're working with the publisher, they might have a certain style guide they're using and they want you to use it or they don't want you to use it. If you're self-publishing, then it's really, you can pick which style you prefer. But the key is to keep it consistent. So, and if you use like spell check and a tool like Grammarly, a pro writing aid, a lot of times that's the way that it will help point that out to you. It doesn't catch everything, but it's just something to be aware of, with consistency. The same with like ellipses. A lot of times I'll see like, the most accepted format is like having a space before, between, and after the periods. But again, the key is just to pick a style and be consistent. And so a lot of times I'll see that one ellipses and on the same page, another ellipses that like the dots are all together, or it's just every set of ellipses looks different. So again, you want to be consistent. Just pick a style and be consistent. And again, I recommend having the space before, between, and after. But again, just be consistent with it. And that's an easy thing to look for, is look for all your ellipses. Are they all the same? Or you can type it in the, the find different ways, the find box different ways, and see if it comes up different ways. Like even dashes, like M dash, sometimes I'll see different sized M dashes, and again, keep it consistent.
Yeah, the M dash, I find that a strange one. Being from the UK, I'm just like, what is that? I all kept thinking, what are people doing? And now I've discovered that, of course, at the other side of the pond, you're all looking at me going, why are you doing your dashes so strangely? Yeah, it's a really funny one.
Yeah, I learned interesting things when I'm editing a book of someone that's from like the UK. Like there's some just little differences in the punctuation, so it's interesting. But again, it's like be consistent with it. Like another common mistake is dialogue punctuation, where some authors who are new to writing fiction, maybe they've written nonfiction or something, or blog posts, but they're not used to writing dialogue. When they read it as a reader, but it's not really sinking in, like the tiny mechanics of, would you use a period or a comma inside the quote? So I see a lot of confusion with that. Going back to the consistency, like sometimes I'll see like curly quotation marks and straight quotation marks. So again, you want to pick a style. Do you want to use the more curved one or the kind of straighter one? Just, you don't want to have it like one sentence has like the straight ones and then another one has the curly ones. So it's just looking at those small details.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. That comes up for me a lot, because depending on if I'm writing, for example, on Scrivener, and I don't know if anyone else has this, but if I'm writing on Scrivener some of the time, but maybe I'm doing some other bits on Word, they have different, they're using different quotation marks. And so, and then sometimes it's not till it's too late that I've realized, oh, there's 2 different styles here. I thought there was only one style. Just as a side note, and just if anybody else uses Atticus, they have this fancy, they'll check your quotation marks and they'll put them all into curly ones. So I just think that's genius. If no one else has discovered that tool yet, it's fabulous. Janyre.
Scrivener, when you compile, you can change it to having all of your quotations be changed into smart quotes when you compile it out.
Perfect. I didn't know that. So I'm really glad to find that out. Thank you. Sorry, Stacey, I interrupted.
I know, because it is an annoying thing, because then you're trying to like, and sometimes you can try copy and pasting the one you want into the find and it'll replace them, but sometimes it's not as cooperative, and so anything to make that easier. And then another thing with dialogue is like not giving each speaker a new paragraph. It's just to improve the flow of the conversation. We're having a different paragraph every time there's a new speaker. Like sometimes authors will just kind of combine, and it can get confusing too. It's like you have dialogue and then you have the character thinking something, and then you have in the same paragraph, then you have the dialogue for the next character, and you just want to separate that out.
Yeah, I do find that with some of my students. Now, I work exclusively with first-time novelists and have assumed that this is something that first-time novelists are kind of getting used to. But I don't know if anybody else. Do you have that experience still with more experienced writers? Is that just one of those things that some writers just struggle with? Lewis, what about you? Have you had that experience with some of your students? Oh, you're on mute, my dear.
Sorry. Yes, I do. It's kind of like what you were saying. Some people, it just comes very naturally to them. I'm also not one of those people. And some people have a really hard time with it. And I love that call out about Atticus and Scrivener. I will have to pass that along because I have some writers I work with who definitely stumble on that, and I don't always catch it. And meanwhile, I have another writer I work with who has like a third eye, and she'll be reading emails of mine, and she'll just be calling out the punctuation, and I'm like, I proofread that 4 times. How did you see that in that paragraph? Some people are just naturals at it, and some people just have a hard time.
Gosh, that makes me laugh, Lewis, because you're one of the people I always look to who gets everything perfect, and I go, oh, I wish I could write as well as you. Obsessive
proofreading and I still miss stuff, and she calls me on it every time. Bless her heart.
So Stacey, I think what I'm getting from and our readers can go and read the chapter to really kind of understand this in more detail, because you do give us some fantastic examples as well. You make it really clear and specific about what where a lot of people can make mistakes, but then how to correct it. So it's a fantastic reference tool that you've given us. It's really brilliant. And particularly with the dialogue, because I do see a lot of my students struggling with that as well. But one of the key messages I think I'm getting from you this evening is that you choose the style that you want, but can use that particular style consistently, and particularly with the ellipses or their em dash, but make sure that you're using that so that there's at least throughout this manuscript, you are consistent in your own style. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, because you just want to pay attention to those small details, because that just adds a level of professionalism.
Yeah. Listen to me there. But I think that fits in really nicely, Janyre, with what you've talked about in your chapter, which is about, the 3 things that we need to be aware of before we sort of send our things out. And one of those sections of your chapter is to be detail-orientated, and look for those inconsistencies. And the other part of your chapter that I really loved was the middle one, which says, one of the things you need to be is be sparkly. I love that. I really, really love that. So I wonder then if you could kind of just give us a highlight of the 3 things that we should be aware of before we do submit and send things off for publication or for querying.
Yeah, so I think whether you're planning to publish independently or you're planning on doing a traditional publisher, our goal is to stand out in a very, very busy crowd of books that are being released. I don't even know what the statistic is anymore, but thousands of books are released every week. And so you want to be able to stand out. And some of the things that we've been talking about, that detail-orientedness, make you stand out, because a reader will sense something is wrong even if they can't tell you what it is. And I think, I don't remember who said it before. Oh, I think it was it Kat, I think, was saying if a character reacts in a certain way, that isn't within their character, a reader will sense something is wrong without being able to name it.
Mhm.
And so some of the things that fall, if you go into the book, I list out a bunch of areas and a bunch of ways and techniques that you can use to find these details that are going to throw a reader off and make them go, oh, something's not right here. But, you know, those outlines that we talked about, the grammar that we were talking about earlier are really important. But then there are things like being knowledgeable about the market. And this is where my marketing background is going to show a little bit here. But really, reading is not about you as an author, but about the reader. And so there are things that you need to be aware of as you're writing that are specific to the market. So Sam brought up earlier, if you're writing a romance, there's an expectation for that happily ever after, or HEA. There's a little tip for you if you're not familiar, and HEA is a happily ever after. There's that expectation of the reader to have that at the end of the book. And if you don't, your reader's going to be ticked off with you. And that's just the way it is. And so knowing your market ahead of time and fulfilling those expectations, or being purposeful in not fulfilling those expectations, is fine, but you have to know what the rule is in order to break it purposefully, is really, really important. So we've got that knowledgeable, we've got the detail. And then Emma was mentioning sparkly. I couldn't come up with a better word. I've been doing these presentations for a couple of years now on this topic. And really what it is you. You need to shine. So we have the editorial, little detailed mindedness. We have the marketing and the being knowledgeable. But to be a triple threat author, we need you. And there are certain things that you can go through to perfect who you are and to help you shine. And again, I go into this in detail in the book, but you have a particular style, a particular voice, and it's really important for that to come out in your book. And sometimes it just takes time. Sometimes it's less about who you are or what your book is and the timing of it. So that I think about, we'll pull out the big one, J.K. Rowling. How many times was she rejected before, her books became a big hit? Colleen Hoover, who is right now topping out Pub Weekly and New York Times and USA Today bestseller lists. She's been self-publishing for a really long time, and the time just hit right. So leaving you with a little bit of encouragement, keep going. That's going to be my theme. As an author, it's something that I struggle with is continuing and moving on, even through those self-doubts. As creatives, I think we can all hear say that we question ourselves and our sanity on a regular basis. And if you aren't, can you send me the secret to always being self-confident? Because I would love that. But really, if you approach each of your books and you go through and kind of be purposeful in those three areas, just being knowledgeable of the market, being yourself, and then just kind of going over those last minute details before you press publish on Amazon or press send to an agent or an editor, I think you'll find yourself starting to stand out a little bit more in the crowd.
Mm-hmm. Such good advice. And not just within the chapter, but those words as well, to not give up, to keep going. It's something I've certainly noticed both in the business world, but then also in the author world as well, that it takes at least sort of 7 to 10 years before you really start to grow a name for yourself in either way and kind of hit your stride and are going. So if anybody's thinking, well, if I don't make it after the first or second book, that's it, I'm not doing it anymore, please don't do that. Please keep going, because it's you're only going to get better and better and better. So I'm just conscious of time. I know that we are over the hour now. I want to say, well, before I say thank you to everybody, Grace, do you want to jump in here with anything? Is there anything that I've not asked or that we should mention about the book, like where you can buy it?
It will be available everywhere on February 28th. You can also go to our website, which is launchpadcountdown.com, and you can meet every single one of the contributors and learn more about the entire series. And I am just so encouraged, excited to keep going on, keep doing this collaborative work with such great authors. So Emma, thank you. And thanks to each of our guests today.
Yes, thank you, everybody. I always like to ask at the end of a show, is there anything that any of you would like to ask each other, or that I have missed out and you think would be pertinent for our listeners? Do you think we covered most things today? Yeah, looks like we covered most things today. Okay, well, we'll leave it there. I'm just going to say thank you to everybody for joining us here on the panel today. Thank you to you, our viewers. It's been a pleasure kind of being with you. And of course, if you do have any questions for anybody, please pop them in the comments below and we will get back to you and give you an answer. Absolutely. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for today. It's been a joy, and it's lovely seeing you. I always like seeing your smiley faces.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.